In the remote outskirts of Black Hollow, a town whose very name sent shivers down the spines of those who knew its history, a long-abandoned mansion stood. To the locals, it was simply the forsaken house, a structure cursed with unspeakable tragedies. Children dared each other to approach its rotting gates, but none ever set foot inside. The house had been untouched for decades, except by one man. Jonathan Crane had always been drawn to the eerie and the forbidden. A historian and investigator of the arcane, he had spent years unraveling mysteries that most dared not acknowledge. When he heard the whispered rumors of a girl's scream still echoing from within the forsaken house, he felt compelled to investigate. It began as a hushed tale passed from elder to elder, about a girl imprisoned in that mansion long ago. Some said she was the daughter of a wicked aristocrat, punished for defying her father. Others claimed she had never truly been human, but something much darker, bound in chains to prevent an unspeakable calamity. No one had proof, only stories. Jonathan arrived at dusk, armed with a lantern, a journal, and a voice recorder. The air around the mansion felt thick, suffocating. The towering, decaying structure loomed over him, its shattered windows like vacant eyes watching his every move. He pushed open the grand, but broken doors. The interior smelled of damp rot and neglect. Dust coated the once majestic furniture, cobwebs stretched like spectral hands reaching from every corner. He moved cautiously, the floorboards creaking beneath his weight. Then he heard it. A faint, agonized wail. A scream not of the present, but of something lingering in the air, as if the walls themselves still mourned. His breath hitched. It was real. Following the sound, Jonathan made his way through the dark corridors until he reached a locked door at the end of a long hallway. The sound was louder now, ragged sobs and cries for help. The handle was ice cold to the touch. With a deep breath, he forced it open. Inside, the room was oddly preserved. A large iron cage sat in the center, its bars rusted but unbroken. And within it, a girl, no older than 16. She wore a torn nightgown, her dark hair matted, her eyes hollow yet alive with desperate fear. "Help me," she whispered, her voice barely audible yet laced with unbearable sorrow. Jonathan took a step closer, but something unseen pressed against his chest, a force, a warning. "Who are you?" he managed to ask, heart pounding. "My name is Ilara," she whispered. "I have been here so long, too long." His historian instincts kicked in. There had been no record of a girl named Ilara in any of Black Hollow's records. If she had been imprisoned here, it was long before the town had even formed. "Who put you here?" he asked. Her lips trembled. "My father. He feared what I was becoming." A chill ran through Jonathan. "And what were you becoming?" Ilara's gaze dropped to the floor. "Something unnatural." Jonathan felt the weight of the room press against him. He had encountered hauntings before, but this was different. This was not just a lingering presence. This was something alive, yet suspended in time. "I will free you," he said, reaching for the cage's lock. "No," she gasped, panic flashing in her eyes. "The cage is not to keep me in. It's to keep something else out." Jonathan froze. Before he could react, a gust of icy wind burst through the room, slamming the door shut behind him. Shadows twisted unnaturally along the walls. The lantern flickered violently, casting grotesque shapes against the peeling wallpaper. And then he heard it, a deep, guttural growl from somewhere in the darkness. A shape began to form. A monstrous presence, neither fully seen nor fully hidden. Its voice was a distorted hiss, words slithering into his mind. "She is mine." Jonathan's entire body screamed for him to run, but his feet refused to move. Ilara clutched the bars of her cage, her face contorted in terror. "Jonathan!" Do not let it take me. The room pulsed with an unnatural force, as if reality itself was shifting. Jonathan realized what had happened. Ilara had been locked away not as punishment, but as protection. Something ancient had bound her to this place, waiting, watching. Jonathan fumbled for the small vial of salt in his coat pocket, a trick of the trade when dealing with the supernatural. He threw a handful at the creeping darkness. The creature shrieked, retreating momentarily. Ilara's hands were turning pale, translucent. "It's taking me," she cried. Jonathan knew he had to act fast. The lock on the cage was rusted shut, but the hinges, those he could break. He grabbed a heavy piece of wood from the floor and slammed it against the bars. Once. Twice. The metal groaned under the force. The creature roared. The room shook violently. With one final strike, the cage burst open. Ilara stumbled forward into his arms. As soon as she crossed the threshold, an ear-piercing scream erupted from the darkness. The entity howled in fury as its form twisted, disintegrating into nothingness. Silence fell. Jonathan held Ilara close, his breath ragged. "It's gone," he whispered, though he wasn't sure if he was reassuring her or himself. Ilara pulled away slightly, looking up at him with wide, unblinking eyes. "You freed me." He nodded. "You safe now?" A slow smile curled on her lips. "Am I?" Jonathan's stomach dropped. Ilara stepped back, her frail form shifting, distorting. Her skin turned ashen, her eyes black as midnight. The ghostly remnants of chains clattered to the floor. "You broke the cage," she murmured, her voice now layered with something ancient and hungry. "You freed me, Jonathan." A cold horror settled in his bones as he realized the truth. The entity had not been the captor. It had been the guardian. Ilara was never the victim, she was the curse. He turned to run, but the shadows swallowed him whole. And the screams of the caged girl echoed once more, heard now by no one at all.